There's nothing more anti-conservative, which, whatever you want to make that term means. There's nothing more anti-conservative than the federal government coming in and overturning elections held by states and all those kinds of things. That's all you need to know about the modern GOP.
Yeah, their loyalty is to power.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Moose Club. In this episode, we're going to talk about the upcoming joint session in Congress, with the House and the Senate, essentially certifying the electoral votes. And with that, there's been a lot of talk recently of certain folks, particularly Josh Hawley of Missouri. Yeah, correct?
Yeah.
Contesting the results in some states. Essentially, it's not going to change the outcome of the election at all. But it's the way he explains it. It's more of like a symbolic thing. It's all bullshit is what it is. But what will essentially happen, the way I understand it, I was reading an AP article on how the whole process works essentially. And each state, they bring the results in like mahogany boxes. I guess that's like the tradition they've always done, which I thought was kind of interesting. But like state by state, they'll bring in the results and then they'll read off the results for the electoral votes. And then there'll be somebody's going to object to it. And each objection has to have somebody from the Senate and the House in order for the objection. So like you saw this a lot with Trump in 2016. There was a lot of House members that were objecting to the results, but no Democrats in the Senate went along with it. So it just died immediately. But with this, there's a ton of people in the House, ton of Republicans in the House that are on board with this. And there's Josh Hawley kind of got this going in the Senate. And now Ted Cruz is on board with it. And there's at least a handful, maybe more in the Senate. And so when they object and there's a House and a Senate member that objects to it, then they go to their separate chambers and they deliberate for like 2 hours and then they vote on it. So even if it passes and it has to pass like to overturn, or I'm not actually sure what happens if both House and the Senate agree to it, what happens, but it's not going to matter. It's a moot point because even if the Senate says, and that's not going to happen in the Senate either because not enough Republican senators, Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Murkowski, there's plenty of Republican senators that aren't going to go along with this. But even if they did in the House, the Democrats have the majority. So they'll vote it down and then back to move on to the next state. And so whether this happens for one state or whether it happens for multiple states, I'm not sure. It starts at like 1:00 on Wednesday, on January 6th. So I guess like it feasibly could be like a super late, like they're still doing this shenanigans because they're objecting to a lot of the closely contested swing states. But so like what I know, Bork, you've been talking about this for Joe, you've been talking about this for a few days, being just annoyed by this whole thing. What do you think of particularly Josh Hawley kind of being the face of this and just the overall kind of what it means and why this is happening?
Well, I mean, I'll defer on Josh Hawley for just a minute. We'll break into him. He's a special case. But, like, Mitch McConnell came out last week saying, like, hey, do not do this for a reason. Now, you are going to have, because they are going to get a senator to agree to it. They have, like, 11 or 12 senators that want to object. They have 141 House members wanting to object. The crazy thing about this is it's going to put a lot of like unsafe seats in 2022 on the record, on vote, saying, do they support democracy? And do you support trying to overthrow a free and fair election by the American people? And even Mitch McConnell, the most partisan of partisan, said this is the dumbest idea you could come up with. And I mean, you mentioned it, Democratic House members did it in 2016. So, I mean, can't really, throw too much shade. But a lot of those House members that were doing it were in comfortably left-leaning districts where it made them look good. I think this is more like people trying to corner a vote from Trump, and that gets into Josh Hawley. This piece of shit, he is not a populist, never was a populist. He sees a small sliver of hope to corner like the Trump vote in 2024 in the primaries. And all of a sudden, he's this massive populist trying to speak for the American people because they're so dismayed. Who are the American people getting this information from? It's not factual evidence. No. Who are the people telling the American people that this election was rigged or unfair? It's the GOP and their soundboards. So now you're forcing every single Congress member of your party to be on the record on a vote. I just don't get it. And Josh Hawley, people complain, and especially in the Trump atmosphere, about like they don't want a politician. They want somebody new from in politics. This is the most political move I've ever seen. And the people that say they hate politics and they hate politicians are like gushing over the fact that this guy's doing it. It's the most backwards thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it's Nate Silver had a tweet the other day that said it was, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of like, this is feeling like this is, Josh Hawley's gonna be someone that pundits talk about being a front runner in 2024 that ends up finishing 5th in Iowa or something to that effect. Like you're right. Like, what's that?
He's Marco Rubio.
Yeah, like
that's what he's gonna be. He's gonna be this.
He was viewed. I mean, you're right. This is all a political play to kind of ingratiate himself with that Trump base, so that he has those voters. When he decides to run for president, I think it's everybody's pretty well certain he's going to run. And so, yeah, like you mentioned, there's a lot of Republican senators on the ballot in 2022 that this is going to make things difficult for. And I mean, I'm sure there's several House members as well that'll make life difficult for. But for him, I think it's a purely selfish and honestly transparent why he's doing it, reason for doing it. Like it's I don't think he's fooling anybody. I don't think he believes this, and I think it's worth noting too. There were Democratic. We both mentioned that folks that were Democrats did this in 2016. Most of those folks that did it in 2016 on the Democratic side were doing it. They weren't saying that the vote is wrong. Like they were doing it in more of protest of voter suppression and some of the policies in states that make it difficult for certain people to cast their ballot. So I mean, it's not apples to apples comparison. Like it's not at all. But Bork, what do you think with the certification of the electoral vote coming up here on the 6th?
Well, even just to draw another distinction between 2016 and now. I mean, in 2016, you could say that the candidate that got the most votes didn't win. I mean, and that's just fact. And, drawing attention to that fact and how that margin keeps getting bigger and bigger, that a candidate can potentially get a larger and larger share of the vote and still lose the Electoral College. I think that it does have some merit to displaying that, hey, we're going to certify the electoral votes for a candidate that, okay, sure, did win important states, whatnot, but less Americans voted for them, just period. So I think that's one thing I would like to distinguish between, oh yeah, well, Democrats did it in 2016. Well, yeah, they also won more votes in both elections. And then kind of I mean, if this was so if this was actually a serious attempt, you would have those swing states that had probably GOP controlled state legislatures sending, or maybe not necessarily authorizing or certifying vote totals, but they would send their own set of electors to Capitol Hill, and then the same kind of process would go on. And the hope always was is that there would be this impasse between the House and the Senate, whereas the Senate isn't voting for these people, or the House is voting for them and the Senate isn't, or vice versa kind of thing. So like that is a constitutional crisis.
Right. Yeah.
Because if both chambers cannot decide on the electors, that is a legitimate, like there is no real plan laid out forward to. But that's not what's happening here. Like at least not what it looks like so far, because there hasn't been state governors or state legislators that's like, okay, yeah, so they're going to send one set of electors and we're going to send our set of electors that go one way or the other kind of thing, and we're just going to let the House or the Congress decide it. So there is, not necessarily constitutional merit to what they're doing, but a potential problem to what they're doing. This is, now we are harkening back to 2016. This is all the things that the GOP atmosphere or periphery said Democrats were being, which is sore losers. I mean, that's pretty much what it comes down to. You do have, Hawley, who's going to spearhead this and to try and thread the needle. Calling anything right-wing populism is that it kind of frustrates me, because to think that you can move down, like forward any sort of GOP policy and say that I'm fighting for the common man, is just like, well, that's just like what the GOP always does. Like they always say that they're fighting for the common man, while somehow their policies always somehow end up benefiting just the absolute tippy top of our country / society. So I mean, just like with all things with the Trump administration, it's half-assed. I mean, he gets on every little outlet he can and complains about one thing or the other, and it's like, yes sir, yep, we'll look into that, Mr. President, absolutely. And that just seems like none of it's ever followed up on. Like, oh yes sir, yep, lots of votes fraudulently certified here, yep, absolutely, yep, we'll look into overturning those for them. And it's just, what pretty much is happening right now is just Hawley doing his best to try and distinguish himself as maybe a more competent politician to move the Trump agenda down the field. Just like Trump tweeting about $2,000 checks. Well, if he was serious about it, he would use an inch of political capital to get that stuff done and put pressure on Mitch McConnell. Doesn't happen. Shocked. That's just, but the difference is now it seems that Democrats now are trying to punish those people, which is good. I just wish it would have happened before the big election, where they could have made big gains, instead of the Georgia election, where they're really punishing the GOP senators for their party just not going for, quote unquote, the populist option, I guess, of the $2,000 checks right now.
Well, what's interesting too is that several of the Republican members of Congress who will be supporting these objections, were on the same ballots that Trump was on. So, I mean, are their elections not valid? Like, I mean,
there was someone, I can't remember what his name was, but there is someone also calling into question the down ballot races now in the key battleground states. He said it defied logic that we were So now this far into it, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, some of the races that we won also might have been fraudulent too, and it seems really stupid that we're not calling them out. So yeah, that's a problem too, by the way, in those states that all these phantom votes are just out there percolating, apparently. Yeah,
Right.
so
Yeah.
take that as much as you will. Like,
right. No.
oh yeah, by the way, we might have cheated too. Wait a minute.
Whoops.
Yeah.
What? Do you have something there, Joe? Sorry, I kind of cut you off.
It's just this party is just absolutely incredible. I thought Trump was the low bar, but at least he had some kind of public and publicity savvy. But
I mean, with Trump, you knew what you were getting. Like, his whole shtick was the anti, despite whether or not it was accurate or not, just his whole persona of how he handled things. Like, but these are some serious, well, ostensibly they were serious politicians that Ted Cruz, for example, that even Hawley was not really thought of as this like wacky, crazy, conservative, but like it just like even with Trump losing, I think it just shows that like the Republican Party is still Trump's. Like, and with all of this, like Trump, I mean, if Trump runs again in 2024, which I think is a real possibility, if not likely, like he has created a situation where it's going to be really, really hard for anybody with a serious shot of winning the nomination to beat him, because all these people are going to be tied to him. So it's not like, and it's not like there's going to be a Republican candidate in the primary that has a real shot that can point to all this and be like, I mean, this was just crazy. I'm trying to get us back to like reasonable, sensible, conservative politics. Like, all these people are going to be tied to Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley. They're all going to be tied to Trump. And like, Trump's just going to be able to be like, well, if you disagreed with it, why'd you support it? Like, why'd you go along with me for 4 years on, like, so.
I resent the fact that two things. I resent the fact that you combined the word serious politician with Ted Cruz in the same sentence, because we all know that's
understandable.
Second, this is what's so just confusing about it, is just like the people that wanted to bring in a new era of politics and politicians by electing Donald Trump are showing that the old tricks of old politicians work. Like, they're showing that the thing that they hate works on them. Like, they're rats experimenting, experiments on rats. Like, I don't understand it. Like, if you want a new era of how politics should be ran, you shouldn't be supporting somebody that is running the oldest play in the playbook.
Right. Well, and not only not only are they showing that, they weren't the party that, or the platform that was going to get rid of, people playing politics. Like, I think you could probably reasonably argue that like it's never been more like swampy and like political than what it is right now. Like, it's just like the whole idea of like drain the swamp, we're gonna get rid of all these phony politics. Like, it's worse than it's been. I mean, I'm late 20s. I'm like not been around for very long, but like it's worse than any point in my life. And I imagine things weren't this crazy and swampy 50 years ago either, or 100 years ago. Like, it's wild. Like, so the whole idea of like, I'm supporting this platform because of draining the swamp and getting all these like career politicians out of here because of all the funny games they play. Like, well, like that. Okay, what's your reason now for supporting it? Because that excuse is out the window.
Yeah, they're showing it work. I mean, these people are showing that exact stuff works.
Right. It's like, who are we talking to? We don't need to name names, but it was on one of your posts when, with the whole budget issue and stuff. And I'm like, you're being like played, like you're being conned right now. Like you're,
Mhm.
and the guy was like, I don't think so. Thank you. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
Well, it's you
Yeah,
kind of
I had to save that real quick because I was kind of crossing the line too. So.
it's just, I mean, it's like what it really depends on how much of a deviation from Republican ideology you think there is at this point that Trump represents. I mean, you could say that. I mean, I think there is something at the heart of draining the swamp is, me like getting some of the corruption out of, not right necessarily corruption isn't the right word, but like, that kind of literally the revolving door between
right.
industries, like
Yeah.
the guy who's going to oversee this agency, oh by the way, I used to work here and is now writing regulations for the
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff has existed forever in America, really. Now, how much of how much do you hold Trump to being actually committed to doing that, or any Republican president? Zero. But it does almost seem to be like they're just full on mask off at this point. Like, hey, this is how we are a minority party where we just, the amount of people that we have to vote that will vote for our agenda is just not enough to win elections. So we have to try other things. So we'll adopt, rhetoric that appeals to a lot of people, and that's fine. That like technically it should be populist rhetoric, not populist Republicans, but they'll certainly adopt any sort of rhetoric to get them elected, whether it goes from, I mean, I think the best dunk on this is the Paul Ryan recently released a statement. And he said, yeah, exactly, a name you haven't heard in a long time. And he said that his problem with this electoral, like the electoral challenges and whatnot, is that there's nothing more anti-conservative, which, whatever you want to make that term means, there's nothing more anti-conservative than the federal government coming in and overturning elections held by states and all those kinds of things. It's like, just like what the quote unquote conservative rationale would be for, like that could easily be weaponized the other way if it were an election that could be contested. But, like there's, these people, they're not bound by anything. That's the thing. Like, where's the money coming from and how do we get that agenda down the field? That's all you need to know about the modern GOP.
Yeah. Their loyalty is to power,
Yeah, exactly. And whatever it takes is just so
Yeah.
Hawley's saying whatever he needs to, like joining forces with Sanders. Like, I mean, it sucks. Like, it pissed me off to see that, but like, of course he's gonna try and do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Watching Paul Ryan appear and say they're like rail against, fighting in, Congress is.
or like Mitch McConnell saying that the 2000 checks are socialism for the rich, like without a shred of irony in his, like, just everything that he represents. Like, you know what, we can't give money to the human beings in this economy because that would be socialism to the rich.
But the problem is
astonishing.
Like like McConnell knows that that's not true, right? Like McConnell knows this money isn't going to rich people. Like he's a smart person. Like he knows that's not the case. But there's a large swath of voters that will hear that and believe it, and that's good for him. And it didn't take Bernie long to, then I think we might have talked about it when he came out and was like, well, somebody needs to explain to the majority leader that maybe he doesn't know this, that 10 of the 25 poorest counties in the country are in his home state of Kentucky. So like,
right.
Like this money's not going to George Soros. It's going to people that need it, like low income, and like, it's not like anybody that has any interest in being educated on anything would be a 30-second Google search away from finding out that, oh, this money is for people making $75,000. And then, and it's so like, it's just, but there's a lot of people who will believe that. And kind of what we were talking about with like, there's no being the party of just power is a lot of these voters are fine with that, and they're fine with the games and the moving goalposts and the going back on what you said before. They're fine with a lot of that because they're either going to vote to protect their guns or vote to limit access to abortion. Like they're single issue voters predominantly reside with one party, the Republican Party. So, I mean, a lot of voters are willing to look past these other things because, well, this is what I really care about, and they're on board with me on this. So, I don't know. I think
I think not only that is that I think some GOP voters are also on, maybe not okay with, but indifferent to abrogating just democratic vote to maintain some of those things. Just like, well, the country's just changed so much. It's not even America in some of these areas anymore.
Right.
And I think it's just like that's a path that's some blinkers are going off of there at least. Like,
right. And we talked about the revolving door of for political appointments, and stuff like that, and in our history with politics. But like, at least for all we can say about somebody like Bill Barr, like you can't say that he's not qualified to be the head of the Justice Department. You just, like he's done it before. Like he's been appointed before in a far less tumultuous time. So like, but like, okay, fine. Maybe you can get on board with that or rationalize that. But as far as like draining the swamp goes, like Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State, like CEO of ExxonMobil, like what like qualifications did he have to, you know what I mean? Like it like, so like
right.
This idea of like, he's going to drain the swamp. Like where, when, like,
right.
So I think it, I think, I mean, we might've gotten a little off track with all this, but I mean, I think it kind of speaks to why these objections to the Electoral College are happening this week. And, but yeah, we'll see. I mean, we know what's going to happen, but the fallout of it will take some time to see, if it affects the midterms in 2022 and all that. So we'll see. But
it's tough not to bounce around just how incoherent the ideology of the governing GOP party is. It's just
I'm with you. Yeah, I agree. But okay. Make sure that all the viewers there like, follow, subscribe, share Moose Club Pod, and then look for us on Spotify, the Moose Club. Thanks for watching. Be on the lookout for our next episode. Thanks.